right, so that's going to bring us to the Whiskey Rebellion and Jay's Treaty. So here's the thing. Just put a tax on whiskey. Grain is basically the most profitable cash crop for many American farmers. Hamilton's whiskey tax ends up putting a very, very difficult burden on Western farmers. So who does the whiskey tax most affect for quiz purposes? Western grain farmers. And it seems to really divide the young republic in half geographically between the East and the West, and it divides them in half economically between the merchants and the farmers, right? And culturally, really, it's between those who live in the city and those who live in rural communities. So in the fall of 1791, there were 16 men in western Pennsylvania. They disguised themselves in women's clothing, which is weird. I don't know why women's clothing. And they go and beat up a tax collector named Robert Johnson, dressed like women, which is kind of funny. Maybe they'd had too much whiskey to drink. They tar and feather him. And they also, when the local deputy marshals start seeking justice and start trying to find out who did it, they beat him up too and tar and feather him. They rob, they beat him, they whip him, they flog him, they tie him up and leave him for dead. Okay? These rebel farmers adopt other protest methods from the Revolution and Shays' Rebellion, like writing local petitions, and they build these like liberty poles and stuff like that. And for the next 2 years, tax collections in this region really dwindle down because nobody wants to get beat up and tarred and feathered for trying to collect taxes, right? Now, in July of 1794, groups of armed farmers go on and attack federal marshals and other tax collectors. They burn down 2 tax collectors' homes, and at the end of the month, an armed force of about 7,000 men that are led by a radical attorney named David Bradford rob the U.S. mail. They gather, and then they kind of gather up around 8 miles east of Pittsburgh, and they go, hey, we're not paying these taxes. We are in control of ourselves. And George Washington is like, that ain't going to happen. I'm going to do something about this. So Washington does something really smart. He looks as though he's going to act one way, and then he kind of prepares in case of the worst. He sends a committee of 3 distinguished kind of Pennsylvania guys to meet with these rebels and try to bring about a peaceful resolution. But at the same time, he gathers an army of about 13,000 militiamen. And on September 19th, he becomes the only sitting president ever to actually lead troops into the field. And he gets into the field and he's leading these troops. Now, he's pretty old at this time. He gets met up with a guy named Henry Lee, who's a revolutionary hero, and he's the current governor of Virginia. Henry Lee's like, dude, you're the president. You can't be out here like leading the army. Like, I know you're the commander in chief, but that's like, you don't actually have to lead them. Let me take care of it. So he gives them to Henry Lee. The federal army moves westward. The farmers hear about it. They scatter because they're like, oh crap, federal army's actually coming to get us. And so, Hamilton, who's really trying to make a dramatic display of this federal authority, he oversees the arrest and the trial of a lot of these rebels. Most of them are released because of lack of evidence. Those who remain, including 2 who were actually sentenced to death for treason, end up getting pardoned by George Washington. But you go, well, nothing really happened. Why? What's the big deal? Well, it did, though. The Whiskey Rebellion really showed that the federal government was capable of quelling internal unrest, and it demonstrated that some citizens, especially poor Westerners, kind of saw the federal government in its current form as the enemy, that they weren't really serving them. And this is going to be an important thing over the next 2-3 decades in the country of who is the government here to serve, the rich people or the regular, everyday, average person, right? Hamilton has, another kind of idea going around in his head. He sees the nation as, engaged in foreign trade, and this is going to help grow their economy. And he wants to pursue a friendly relationship with Great Britain. Now, obviously, after the Revolution, America's relationship with Britain was a little strained, right? Mostly because the warfare that was going on between the British and the French. So this naval war going on between the British and the French really threatened American shipping. And you had this thing called impressment, where basically the British Navy would attack an American shipping vessel, take the sailors, and force them into the British Army. Force them to help fight against the French. It's called impressment. And it really was terrorizing American sailors. And so American trade could be really risky and expensive. And Washington was becoming very conscious of the American weaknesses. And he determined that if I take sides in this war and I pick the wrong side, that's going to put me in a really bad position as a nation. So he decides, I'm not going to take sides, and in fact, we're going to remain neutral. So with his permission, he sends John Jay, who's currently was serving as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he sails to London, and he's going to try and negotiate a treaty that's going to make Britain and the United States happy. Now, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison are really, really opposed to this. They don't trust Britain. They see the treaty as basically Americans, favoring Britain over France, who they supported. The French had just overthrown their own monarchy, and Republicans thought the United States should, be glad to have a friendship with this new revolutionary state in France. And they suspected that Britain would favor northern merchants and manufacturers over, farmers. So they were really against this. But despite all of that, John Jay signs a treaty, and it had three major parts, and you need to know the three major aspects of Jay's treaty here. It said that the British had to abandon all their territory, all their military positions in the Northwest Territory by 1796. The British also had to compensate American merchants for their losses at sea. And in return, the United States agreed that Britain would be like their most prized trade partner, which basically meant that they would support Britain over France in this conflict. Unfortunately, the treaty did not end the idea of impressment. So for Federalists, this treaty was really a significant accomplishment. It gave the United States, who was a relatively weak power, the ability to stay neutral in European wars, and it preserved American prosperity by protecting trade. But for Jefferson and the Republicans, they said, hey, this is proof that the Federalists, are not standing up for liberty and the idea of American, the American idea of republicanism. The Federalists had sided with the monarchy over a republic, and they had submitted to British influence in American affairs without even ending the idea of impressment. Congress debates this, but more than anything, it really creates a permanent divide in the political landscape, and you end up with two major political parties, the Federalists and the Republicans. Okay?